Hello, humans and non-human creatures who enjoy studying humans and possible mutations of humans from the future who are researching the past humans' interaction. Thank you for joining me. Those of you who look at my YouTube channel may have noticed this too. I noticed it because I get notifications, which helps one notice. Over the past week, some anonymous human got really obsessive with my YouTube channel and started posting, multiple things on the comments section. And I get all these. They all come to me automatically. And it was kind of a fascinating thing because I think it brings up some issues that are interesting to talk about, and maybe we can talk about them. So the first one I saw, I don't know if it was the first one he posted, was accusing me of being a neo-Nazi, which is always, a fun thing. It happens on the internet. Everybody gets called a Nazi at some point, I suppose. It's part of the rules of the game, so I'm a neo-Nazi. Apparently because he misunderstood something in one of my previous videos, and perhaps others of you misunderstood it as well. I put up a video a little while back called Buddha Voted for Donald Trump. And of course, the title was meant to attract some attention, but of course, I still get under 1,000 views on these things. So by YouTube channel, under 1,000 views is nothing. You might as well not be making videos at all. But I like you, 900 and some people out there, so I keep making them. Under 1,000 views doesn't even trigger the ads to pay me any revenue or anything. So I'm not making any money off of these videos, but it's fun to do them, so here you go. Title was meant to attract attention, but if you watched the video, you would understand what I meant by that. So this guy misinterpreted what I said as the Buddha would have voted for Donald Trump. So Buddha voted for Donald Trump and the Buddha would have voted for Donald Trump are two very different statements. And they kind of relate to what I wanted to talk about. If you say the Buddha would have voted for Donald Trump, that means the Buddha, who one would assume you are invoking because he's some sort of a perfect person, an enlightened being, which I'd also like to get into, that concept. And you say he would have voted for Donald Trump. That means you think that the perfect person would have picked the perfect leader, and therefore it's an endorsement of Trump. I don't know how many times I can say it. I don't like Donald Trump very much. I didn't vote for him. Not too impressed with his policies, or even less impressed with his personality as a president and as a leader. And I say this all the time, but people just blip right past that. By saying the Buddha voted for Donald Trump, though, I'm trying to invoke a kind of a Buddhist way of looking at the world. It's kind of related to the koan, which some of you have probably heard, does a dog have Buddha nature? So that koan is still used today, but these days I'm not sure if it means quite the same thing as it used to. Because in ancient China, a dog was viewed as a real low-life, scummy sort of animal that was used for service. It wasn't a pet. And so maybe if you wanted to pick an animal in our culture, you might say, does a pig have Buddha nature? That might be more close. But another way to say it in our culture would be, does Donald Trump have Buddha nature? There you go. So you think of the thing that's most reviled and say, does even that have Buddha nature? And I was trying to say, because the answer to the koan is the answer to the koan is mu, which means nothingness. But one of the other answers to the koan is, of course, the dog has Buddha nature, and of course, Trump has Buddha nature, because everything has Buddha nature. So I'm kind of trying to point out that when you separate something away from yourself and say, that's the evil guy over there, well, you're deviating from the Buddhist point of view, and that was the point of that video, for anybody who didn't get it. The other thing that came up with this guy is he's posting comments in response to other people's comments. So he was telling somebody who was asking me about my Zazen practice that obviously Brad Warner doesn't do Zazen, and if he only would do Zazen, it would calm his raging mind. That's interesting too, because actually, as I know me a little better than this guy does, and I know that since 1983 or 82, I'm not sure which year I first met Tim McCarthy, I've done Zazen pretty much every day. Now, there were some times when I missed. There were times when I gave up on it, in the 80s mostly, and every time I gave up on it, things only got worse. And it never improved anything to stop doing Zazen every day. So I always eventually went back. And I don't know, during that time I might have given it up for a month at a time on a couple of occasions. It's hard to remember exactly. But pretty much since the beginning of the 1990s, when I finally just said this giving up Zazen thing isn't working, I've done Zazen every damn day, unless I was too jet lagged, because I travel a lot to do it. That occasionally that has happened, but otherwise every damn day. So just imagine how raging my mind would be if I hadn't done that. See, this is always my go-to response. People will say, "Oh, that guy does Zazen a lot, but he's still an asshole." And I go, "Well, maybe, but if he hadn't done Zazen, imagine how much more of an asshole he would be." So, we don't know. We don't have any way of judging this. The other thing this guy seemed real upset about was my views on reincarnation, which I understand that. People like to be told by someone in authority that they will live forever. This is a common thing in Western culture. The interesting stuff about reincarnation is that the people who are most likely to believe in reincarnation, the Buddhists and Hindus of India and elsewhere, Asia, they look upon reincarnation as a bad thing. So they already tend to, blanket statements are always incorrect, but the tendency is to believe that reincarnation is a fact and then try to figure out how to not get reincarnated, which I find fascinating because it's exactly the opposite of how reincarnation is understood in the West. We hear about reincarnation and we're like, "Oh boy, we get to live forever, yay!" So that's what happens to me. It happens to a lot of people who question reincarnation, that the internet fills up with chatter, here I am typing, that is trying to say that they don't have the proper authority. And, maybe I don't have the proper authority, but this is my personal belief. 30-some years of Zazen practice and a few kind of mind-blowy moments that I've talked about have left me still skeptical about that. But there are other videos where I go into that, so I won't go into that one. Just the interesting thing that this tends to trigger certain people to get upset. But to wrap it all up into what I think is the most salient thing, one of the things this guy was saying is that I can't possibly understand Buddha and Dogen because they were enlightened beings. And this was the thing, he just kind of casts it, into the maw of whatever and moves on. This is the most interesting one, this idea of enlightened beings. I find that to be a problematic concept, because the concept of the enlightened being is the infallible someone. Most religions have an infallible someone at their core. Certain kinds of Buddhists tend to make Buddha the infallible person at the core of the religion. Dogen often gets in there as well, but then there is the much more general concept of the enlightened being. And so the enlightened being is the person who exists among us or existed among us in the past, who is infallible, unquestionable, who everything that person said has to be correct because they said it, and the only possibility of anything they said being wrong is if you misinterpret it. This is kind of a nice way out for people to deal with the more uncomfortable aspects of certain prophets of the past. We won't name names, but you know who I'm talking about. They'll say, well, he said that, and he's the perfect prophet, so it must be correct, but we're misinterpreting it. It doesn't mean we have to go kill the infidels. It means we have to kill their infidelity or something like that. And it works. But I think behind that lies a much more problematic notion of the enlightened being in the first place. And the thing I like about Buddhism, at least my personal understanding of Buddhism, is the elimination of the idea of the enlightened being, of the perfect person. Now, we still talk about enlightenment, but enlightenment is not something that confers upon a person perfection. It doesn't confer upon a person the inability to ever make a mistake. And if we look upon the people of the past, Dogen and Buddha included, as people who were infallible, we're making a tremendous mistake. And I always compare it to science. If scientists had said, Einstein is an enlightened scientist and everything Einstein said must be perfect, then we could never move on, we could never progress, we could never advance beyond where Einstein was. And I think we really have to do that in terms of meditation practice. I won't even say religion. In meditation practice, it is possible, unlikely, I would say, it is possible, though, to go beyond Dogen, to go beyond Buddha. At least, maybe not in terms of their personal understanding, which they had, because I would say that Dogen probably is a person who, as much as possible, understood himself as much as a human being is able to understand themselves. However, his ability to express that understanding may be flawed. There may be things in his language, in the language that he was born into, that limits what he can say about this experience. Same with Buddha. And we can find ways to advance beyond what they were able to do. Simultaneously, one would hope we are practicing as deeply as they were, which is, questionable. Nobody can really measure it. I would say, in my humble supposition, that there are people in this world today who are as clear in their understanding of themselves as anybody ever was in the past, as clear as Dogen was, as clear as Buddha himself was. And when those people are able to express themselves clearly, that's a wonderful thing. Sometimes there's a person who becomes very, very enlightened, let's use that word cautiously, but is not an articulate person. Sometimes there's somebody who's not very enlightened, probably, but who happens to be fairly articulate. I don't think I'm being unhumble by saying that I'm a good writer. I'm pretty good at expressing myself. Whether my enlightenment levels up to my ability to express that enlightenment is another question, and I don't think anybody can answer that, not even me. Just some interesting food for thought. The guy was pissed off that I was advertising my Patreon, which is below, and my PayPal, which is below, so you can donate to me. But as I told him in a comment, this is how I make my living, this is how I earn my bread, and how I can buy books about, the goodies when I go to England, and also eat and pay the rent and do that kind of stuff. So thank you for donating. Appreciate it. See you next time.